A nurse once handed me a stranger's newborn in a hospital corridor and asked me to hold her for 5 minutes. She never came back. Not in 5 minutes. Not in 50. By the time the sun came up, I had fed that baby, rocked her to sleep, given her a name of my own, and gone looking, through hospital CCTV, through a bus route I hadn't taken in 6 years, through a family's worst night, for the frightened 17-year-old girl who had walked out of that hospital alone. What started as 5 minutes ended up rewriting 3 people's lives before breakfast, mine included. I'm Alice Bennett. I'm 24. And this is the strangest night of my entire life. By hour 6, I had named her. I want to be clear that this was not part of the plan. There was no plan. There had never, at any point in that evening, been a plan. That was rather the whole problem, but somewhere around 1 a.m., sitting on a plastic chair in a hospital corridor that smelled of antiseptic and vending machine coffee, rocking a baby who was absolutely, categorically not mine, I looked down at her scrunched, furious little face and said, out loud, to no one, right? You're Bean. Somebody's got to call you something. Bean did not object. Bean, in fact, seemed to find this whole situation a great deal less alarming than I did, which felt, frankly, unfair, given that she was the one who'd been abandoned by hospital staff and I was merely the idiot who'd said yes. I should explain how I got here. My name is Alice Bennett. I'm 24, I work as a teaching assistant at a primary school in Leeds, and until 11 o'clock that Tuesday night, the most dramatic thing that had happened to me all year was accidentally calling my headteacher Mum in front of the entire staff room. I was at St. Aldhelm's General that night because my sister Kate was in labor 4 floors up, and our family group chat, the Bennett Bunch Rabbit Face, a name my mother chose in 2019 and refuses to reconsider, had reached a level of chaos that can only be described as biblical. Mum, any news? Mum, Alice, any news? Mum, I have rung the front desk 3 times. They are being very short with me. Dad, Diane, leave the poor receptionist alone. Mum, I am simply asking a question. David, Jess, my best mate, added to chat for reasons no one now remembers. Guys, I love this family, but I am begging you to let this woman push in peace. I'd been camped out in the family waiting room for 4 hours with my mother, who alternated between weeping happily and interrogating anyone in scrubs who walked past, and my father, who had brought a crossword and was pretending, unconvincingly, that this was a perfectly normal Tuesday. Kate's husband Rob was upstairs with her, sending updates so sparse and terrifying, contractions closer now. She's shouting a lot. Mostly at me, that my mother had taken to pacing the corridor like an expectant father in a 1950s film, minus the cigar. Jess, texting from her sofa 40 minutes away with the specific enthusiasm of a woman living vicariously through someone else's family crisis, had opinions on everything. Jess, is it weird that I've had 3 custard creams and I'm not even related to this baby? Jess, update me the second anything happens. Jess, also tell your mum I said hi and also to leave the receptionist alone. I can hear the chaos through the phone screen. Somehow I'd known Jess since we were 11, which meant she had, over the years, become a sort of unofficial 6th member of my family, present for every birth, breakup, and minor domestic emergency the Bennetts had produced since roughly the Blair government. She was not, that particular night, physically present, which, given what was about to happen, I have never quite decided whether to be grateful for or genuinely furious about. I'd gone for a walk to escape my mother's pacing, more than anything, and to give Dad a break from being loudly, repeatedly informed that his crossword clue was obviously wrong. David, 6 letters, think. Down 2 floors, along a corridor I had no real reason to be in, past the maternity assessment unit, when a nurse came barreling out of a side room so fast she nearly took me out at the knees. That was Fiona. She was younger than me, maybe, or the exact same age, with the specific gray-white exhaustion of someone 6 hours into a shift that had gone very wrong very fast. She had a baby in her arms, swaddled, tiny, red-faced, unmistakably brand new, and an expression I would spend the rest of that night trying to properly name. Panic wasn't quite it. It was more like someone doing very fast arithmetic with too few numbers. She looked at me the way you look at the only other person in a burning building. I'm so sorry, I know this is completely mad, but I have a patient crashing in Bay 4 and there's no one, there's genuinely no one. Can you just hold her for 5 minutes? Just 5 minutes. I promise. I wanted on the record that I did, in fact, hesitate. I don't work here, I said, which felt like the single most useless sentence I had ever produced in my entire life. I know, I'm sorry, it's just 5 minutes, I promise, I just need someone with 2 functioning arms who isn't also about to have a heart attack, and everyone else on this corridor is either 81 or asleep. She was already easing the baby toward me as she spoke, and my body, apparently operating on some older, more useful instinct than my brain, was already reaching to take her. Her name's on the tag. Just 5 minutes. I promise you, 5 minutes. And then she was gone, back through the double doors, shouting something to someone I couldn't see, and I was standing in a hospital corridor at 11 o'clock at night holding a baby that was not related to me in any way, shape, or legal capacity, with absolutely no idea what to do next. I looked down. The little plastic tag on her wrist said, in smudged biro, Baby Girl Ward. 1942, 4 hours old. 4 hours old, and already, apparently, on her second guardian. 5 minutes came and went. I stood in the corridor, swaying slightly, the way you do with babies before you even realize you're doing it, some ancient software installing itself in real time. 10 minutes. 15. I peered through the little window in the double doors Fiona had vanished through and saw exactly the sort of controlled chaos you'd expect, a crash cart, 6 or 7 people moving very fast around a bed, someone shouting numbers. Bay 4, I understood with a slightly sick feeling, was not a quick job. At the 20-minute mark, an older nurse bustled past, and I did what any reasonable person would do, which was fling myself directly into her path. Sorry, hi, I'm holding this baby for someone? Fiona? She said 5 minutes, it's been 20, I don't actually know what I'm meant to be doing. The nurse, who I would later learn was called Pam and had worked on that ward for 19 years and had seen, by her own account, absolutely everything, and several things twice, gave me a brief, harried once-over. Fiona's dealing with the arrest in 4, she said. Give me 1 second, love, I'll get someone to take her. That someone did not materialize. 20 minutes became 40. 40 became an hour. I texted my mother, still with Kate? Going to be a bit, don't worry, long story, which was, in retrospect, an almost comically inadequate summary of my situation, and sat down on a plastic chair with Bean, who had, by this point, started to fuss. I did not know what babies wanted when they fussed. I am an aunt as of, at that point, roughly 6 hours in the making, upstairs, presumably, though I hadn't even met that baby yet either. I had approximately 0 practical baby experience beyond a first aid course I'd half paid attention to 2 years prior. I bounced her, gently, the way I'd seen people do in films. It worked, marginally. Bean settled into a low, grizzling simmer instead of a full boil, and I exhaled for what felt like the first time in an hour. Right, I told her, quietly, mostly to hear a voice that wasn't a monitor beeping. Let's just wait for Fiona, yeah? 5 minutes, she said. She'll be back. Fiona was not back in 5 minutes. By hour 2, I had located a vending machine, a spare blanket from a linen trolley I felt only mildly guilty about commandeering, and a member of staff, a healthcare assistant called Deja, kind-eyed, clearly run off her feet, who confirmed, apologetically, that Bay 4 was still going, that Fiona was a bit tied up, and that someone would sort the baby out shortly. Shortly turned out to be doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence. Upstairs, my own family saga was progressing without me. Kate had reached, per my mother's increasingly unhinged text updates, the pushing bit, which my mother relayed with the breathless drama of a war correspondent. I sat 2 floors below, feeding a stranger's baby from a tiny hospital issue bottle that Deja had produced from somewhere with the harried efficiency of a woman doing 3 jobs at once, and thought, not for the first time that night, that this was possibly the strangest evening of my entire life, and I had once been maid of honor at a wedding where the best man fell into the cake. I asked Deja, gently, if anyone knew where the baby's mother was. Deja's face did something complicated. That's above my pay grade, love, honestly. There was a bit of a to-do earlier. I think the mum's not on the ward anymore. Not on the ward, I repeated slowly. As in, discharged? As in, Deja said, lowering her voice, glancing back toward the nurse's station, as in nobody seems entirely sure where she's got to. I looked down at Bean, asleep now, milk-drunk, one tiny fist curled against her own cheek, 4.5 hours old and already, somehow, the subject of a small, quiet institutional mystery that nobody appeared to be in any hurry to solve. Okay, I said, to her, to myself, to nobody. Well, I'm not going anywhere, so. That, it turned out, was the single most consequential sentence I said all night. At around 12:15, in a fit of genuine desperation, I rang Jess. I need you to Google something for me, I said, in the low, urgent whisper of a woman trying not to wake a baby she has no legal right to be holding. How do you know if a baby's fussing because it's hungry or because it's got wind or because it just hates you specifically? There was a pause on the line so long I thought the call had dropped. Alice, Jess said eventually, with the caution of someone approaching a bomb disposal situation, why do you need to know that? Whose baby have you got? It's a long story. Is Kate's baby out already? Did they let you hold it? Why do you sound like you're hiding from a teacher? It's not Kate's baby, Jess. Another pause, even longer. Alice Marie Bennett, whose baby is that? I explained, as quietly and quickly as I could manage, while Bean grizzled softly against my shoulder and a man 3 chairs down slept through the entire conversation with his mouth wide open. Jess, to her enormous credit, did not laugh, did not panic, and did not, unlike approximately everyone else I would explain this to over the following 12 hours, ask me why on earth I hadn't simply put the baby down somewhere and walked away. Right, she said instead, with the brisk competence of a woman who had, in fact, Googled several relevant things during my explanation. Wind first, always wind first, that's the easy one to fix. Sit her up, support her chin, little circles on the back. If that doesn't work, she's probably hungry, and if she's not hungry either she just wants to be held properly against a heartbeat, which, lucky you, you've currently got 2 of, seeing as you're stressed out of your mind. It worked. Obviously it worked. Jess has never once in 14 years of friendship given me advice that didn't work, which remains, to this day, deeply annoying, and by midnight Bean had gone from grizzling to a small, damp, entirely peaceful weight against my collarbone, and I sat there in a hospital corridor feeling, for the first time all night, faintly competent. Thank you, I whispered down the phone. You are going to tell me every single detail of this later, Jess said. I want a full report. I want names. I want a timeline. If I survive the night, you'll get a timeline. Don't be dramatic, you're holding a baby, not storming a beach. You weren't here 20 minutes ago when I genuinely thought the trolley man was going to arrest me for loitering. At 12:47 a.m., my sister had a baby. I know this because my mother appeared at the end of the corridor at 12:52, radiant, tear-streaked, still in a hospital gown herself apparently for solidarity purposes, and shrieked, "Alice, she's here, it's a girl," loudly enough that 3 separate people shushed her, at which point she noticed I was, in fact, holding a baby, and stopped dead. "Whose is that?" "It's a bit of a long story, Mum." "Alice." My mother has a very particular tone she uses when she suspects one of her children is about to say something that will require significant unpacking. "Whose baby is that?" I explained. As best I could, at midnight, for hours into holding another woman's daughter, my own voice slightly hoarse with disuse and disbelief. My mother listened with the expression of a woman watching a house of cards go up in real time, and when I finished, she did the single most my mother thing she has ever done in 24 years of being my mother, which was say, "Well, you'd better come and meet your niece first, and then we'll sort this out," as though sorting this out were a matter of finding a lost umbrella. So that is how I ended up, at 1 in the morning, standing at the door of Kate's room holding a stranger's baby in one arm while my sister, sweaty, exhausted, incandescently happy, held her own daughter in the other bed, and the two of us just looked at each other for a long moment, 2 women each holding an entire tiny universe, mine on loan, hers permanent. "You could not," Kate said, voice cracked with laughter and exhaustion in equal measure, "have picked a less dramatic night to have your own baby crisis. I was having contractions and you were out here just collecting one?" "I didn't collect her, Kate, she was given to me. There's a difference, is there, though?" Rob, holding his own daughter, my niece, Florence, 7 pounds 2 ounces, thoroughly unimpressed by the entire evening, leaned over to peer at Bean with the mild, sleep-deprived interest of a new father who has, in the last few hours, become entirely unshockable. "Bit of an eventful night for the Bennets," he said. 2 babies, 1 family, 0 of them planned by anyone in this room. My mother, meanwhile, had reached the specific stage of grandmotherly euphoria where logistics stop applying to her entirely, and attempted, with genuine sincerity, to hold both babies at once, 1 in each arm, just to see, an experiment that lasted approximately 4 seconds before Florence began to protest and my mother announced, with total seriousness, "Right, well, I suppose I'll have to have more grandchildren. This is clearly not a one-arm job," at which point my father, without looking up from his crossword, said, "Diane, that is not how any of this works," and the whole room dissolved into the kind of exhausted, giddy laughter that only happens at 1 in the morning after something enormous has just occurred. "Can I ask," Kate said, once she'd caught her breath, "what the actual plan is here? Like, long-term? Are you just going to hold her indefinitely? Are we adopting a baby tonight, is that what's happening? Because I feel like that's the kind of thing that should probably be a family discussion." "I don't have a plan, Kate, I have a baby and a great deal of confusion." "Well," Kate said, settling back against her pillows with Florence tucked against her chest, "for what it's worth, you look like you know what you're doing." Which is either very reassuring or extremely alarming, and at 1 in the morning I genuinely cannot tell which. I laughed, properly, for the first time since 11 o'clock, and Bean stirred against my shoulder, and for one strange, suspended moment, standing in that overheated little room with my sister's brand-new family and a stranger's entire future asleep in my arms, I felt something shift in my chest that I did not yet have a name for. It was Pam, the 19 years on the ward nurse, who eventually escalated things properly. Somewhere around 2 in the morning, once Bay 4 had, mercifully, stabilized. Right, she said, arriving at my chair with the brisk energy of a woman finally able to address a problem that had been quietly festering for 3 hours. Let's get this sorted, shall we? I am so sorry, love, this should never have happened. Is Fiona okay? Pam's face softened. She will be. She's had the fright of her life, and she's currently being read the riot act by the ward sister, which, between us, she probably needs, because handing a newborn to a member of the public and then having a cardiac arrest eat your entire shift is not, well, it's not ideal, put it that way. So what happens now? Now, Pam said, we need to find out where Mum's got to. That, it turned out, was where things stopped being merely chaotic and started being genuinely strange. The baby's file showed a mother, Chloe Ward, DOB 03/09, which put her, by my quick and slightly horrified maths, at 17 years old, admitted alone that afternoon, no named next of kin, no birth partner, delivered at 1942, and then, according to the notes, left the ward against advice at approximately 2015. Half an hour after giving birth. Half an hour after Bean was born, her mother had got up, got dressed, and walked out of the hospital, and in the chaos of a short-staffed night shift and an unrelated cardiac emergency 2 rooms down, nobody had managed to stop her, or even, until now, properly notice. She just left? I said. Without her baby? Pam's expression was the particular kind of tired that comes from having seen this exact shape of tragedy before, in different costumes, more times than she'd like. Happens more than you'd think, love. Frightened girl, no support, nobody in that room but a midwife and a monitor. People do desperate things when they think there's no version of this that ends alright for anyone. I looked down at Bean, asleep, oblivious, 4 hours old when I'd taken her and going on 7 hours old now, entirely unaware that the 2 adults meant to be steering her into the world had both, in their own separate and very different ways, momentarily vanished on her. Someone has to find her, I said. That'll be social services and the police, love, not really a job for, I know, I said. I know it's not my job. I'm just saying someone has to. Pam looked at me for a long moment, really looked, the way people do when they're recalibrating an assumption, and something in her face changed. You're not planning on putting her down anytime soon, are you? She said. It wasn't really a question. Not really, no. Before anyone could actually go looking for Chloe, there was, in the specific way of all British institutions in a crisis, a great deal of process to wade through first. A duty manager named Mr. Aldous appeared at 2:30, clutching a clipboard and radiating the weary energy of a man who had been woken up for this and was not thrilled about it. He asked me, 3 separate times, in 3 slightly different ways, to confirm that I did not, in fact, work for the hospital, as though hoping that on the 4th attempt I might crack and admit to secretly being an off-duty midwife. I'm a teaching assistant, I told him, for the 3rd time. I teach year 4. I was here for my sister. I have never held a baby that wasn't related to me before tonight, and I would very much like someone else to hold this one soon, because my arm has gone properly numb, but nobody currently seems willing to actually do that. Right, Mr. Aldous said, writing something down with the grim satisfaction of a man finally getting a piece of paperwork exactly correct. And you understand this is a highly unusual situation. I am extremely aware of that, yes. We'll need to log an incident report. Fine. And a safeguarding referral. Also fine. And I'll need your details for the file. Also fine, Mr. Aldous, genuinely, whatever you need, I'm not going anywhere. I've established that already, several times, to several different people. He looked at me for a long moment, pen hovering, and something in his officious expression finally cracked into something more human. For what it's worth, he said, more quietly, most people would have put her in the nursery the second someone offered. I did offer to have someone else take her, I said. Nobody had a spare pair of hands. I checked. Repeatedly. No, he said. I don't imagine anyone did. It's been that sort of shift. He clicked his pen closed. I'll get the paperwork moving. In the meantime, Pam tells me you might have an idea where Mum's got to. I might. Then let's not waste any more time on my clipboard, Mr. Aldous said, with the air of a man surprising even himself, and get you talking to the social worker instead. What followed was, I will freely admit, several hours in which I inserted myself somewhat more firmly into hospital business than I had any actual right to, fueled by vending machine tea, a fierce and slightly irrational sense of responsibility, and the specific stubbornness that runs, unbroken, down the entire female line of my family. Deja, it turned out, had seen Chloe earlier that afternoon, quiet little thing, on her own, kept saying she was fine when she very much was not fine, and remembered she'd mentioned, once, in passing, waiting for a bus that stopped near a shopping precinct on the other side of the city. Not much. But something. A security guard called Mr. Osei, working the front entrance, pulled up the CCTV without much persuading once Pam vouched for the situation. Poor lass looked about 12, walked out that door at 7:30, didn't even have a coat on. I remember thinking that, and there she was, small and hunched and moving fast, on a grainy black and white feed, out through the automatic doors and into the dark. We watched it 3 times. Mr. Osei, a broad, quiet man who'd clearly seen a great many things pass through those doors over the years, none of them making him any less gentle about it, rewound the footage each time without being asked, and pointed things out I would never have noticed on my own, the way she paused, just for a second, at the edge of the frame, one hand pressed flat against the glass, before she made herself keep walking. The way she checked over her shoulder twice, not like someone running from the hospital, but like someone checking, hoping, that somebody might be coming after her. She wanted stopping, Mr. Osei said quietly, more to himself than to any of us. Whole bodies saying it. Shame nobody was looking properly. Nobody was free to look properly, Pam said, not unkindly, more like a woman stating an old, tired fact about the job she'd given 19 years to. That's the whole trouble with a short-staffed shift. Everybody's looking at the fire in front of them. Nobody's got a spare pair of eyes for the one that hasn't caught yet. I thought about that sentence for a long time afterwards. I still do, if I'm honest. I sat with Pam at an increasingly involved hospital security office at 3 in the morning, being asleep against my chest in a sling someone had produced from lost property, watching 7 seconds of footage of a frightened girl walking away from the biggest, scariest thing that had ever happened to her, and I felt something in my chest crack cleanly in two. I know that bus route, I said suddenly. The one from the precinct. It goes past the Meadowvale estate. Pam looked at me. How would you know that? Because, I said slowly, the pieces arranging themselves, I grew up 2 streets over. Mr. Osei, to his enormous credit, did not ask a single follow-up question about why a member of the public was quite so involved in a safeguarding matter well outside her job description. He simply nodded, wrote something down on a clipboard, and said, "Well, that's more than we had 10 minutes ago," in the tone of a man who has clearly seen every version of chaos a hospital can produce and stopped being surprised by any of it years ago. Pam, meanwhile, was on the phone to the ward sister, then to the on-call social worker, then, briefly, to someone she referred to only as the duty manager, her voice moving between brisk professionalism and something raw underneath it, the sound, I realized, of a woman who had watched this exact shape of near miss happen before, in different costumes, and hated it every time. I sat with Bean asleep against my chest, listening to fragments of 3 separate conversations happening in 3 different registers around me, and found myself doing the thing I always do under pressure, which is make lists. Bus route. Time she left. What she was wearing. Nobody with her. No coat. She'll be cold, I said, to nobody in particular, and Deja, passing with an armful of blankets destined for somewhere else entirely, paused just long enough to press 2 into my free hand without a word, which felt, at the time, like the kindest thing anyone had done for me all night. I should tell you something about myself here, because it matters, and because I've been dancing around it for 9 sections and Bean deserves better than a narrator who won't be honest. My mom was 17 when she had my sister Kate. Not my dad, a different man, a boy really, who left before Kate turned 1 and was never seen again by any of us. My mom met my dad 3 years later, and he adopted Kate properly when I was a baby, and by the time I was old enough to understand any of it, it was just a fact of our family, unremarkable, the way facts become when you grow up inside them. Kate is my sister in every single way that has ever mattered. My dad is her dad. Nobody in our house has ever once treated it as anything other than exactly that. But I grew up watching my mum, on the rare occasions she talked about it, describe those first few months of Kate's life with a specific, quiet terror that never fully left her voice. 17, alone, a baby, a council flat 2 streets from where Chloe Ward's bus route ran, and a version of events that could have gone so many darker ways than the one we got. The only reason it worked out, my mum told me once, when I was maybe 16 and asking too many questions, is that my mum, your Nana, never once made me feel like I'd ruined my life. Everyone else did. The neighbors did. The bloke at the corner shop did, with his little looks. But your Nana just turned up the next morning with a bag of nappies and said, "Right, show me what needs doing," and that was that. I think about what would have happened if she hadn't. I think about it more than you'd probably want to know. My Nana died when I was 13, so most of what I know about her comes secondhand, filtered through my mum's stories, but there is one detail that has stayed with me more clearly than any other. Apparently, for the first 6 months of Kate's life, my Nana kept a spare key to her own flat on a string round her neck, under her cardigan, specifically so that if my mum ever rang at 3 in the morning too frightened or too exhausted to explain why, she could simply say "I'm coming" and be there. In 4 minutes flat, no negotiation required. My mum used that key exactly twice in 6 months. Both times, my Nana never once asked what had gone wrong. She just came and made tea, and stayed until whatever crisis had passed, and went home again without comment. I hadn't thought about that key in years, let alone that conversation. I thought about it very hard, sitting in a hospital security office at 3 in the morning with a stranger's baby asleep on my chest, watching grainy footage of a 17-year-old walking alone into the dark. I need to find her, I told Pam. Not the police. Not first, anyway. Me. I think I might know how to talk to her. Pam, to her enormous credit, did not tell me I was being reckless, though I suspect she thought it rather loudly. What she did instead was ring the ward sister, ring the on-call social worker, a calm, quick-thinking woman called Priya Shah who arrived within the hour, visibly unbothered by being summoned at 3 a.m., the mark of someone who has clearly done this before, and, after a fairly involved conversation about safeguarding and appropriate adult presence that I mostly listened to while jiggling Bean and trying to look responsible, agreed that I could come along, provided Priya led, provided I did exactly as I was told, provided this was very clearly not, under any circumstances, a solo mission. "You're not Nancy Drew," Priya told me firmly, in the car, being strapped into a hastily produced hospital-issue car seat in the back. "You're a bystander with local knowledge. That's useful. It is not the same as being in charge." "Understood," I said, and meant it about 60%. The drive itself took 11 minutes, which felt, somehow, both far too long and nowhere near long enough. Priya drove with the calm, unhurried competence of someone who had made this exact drive, different streets, different girl, same fundamental shape of crisis, more times than she probably cared to count, and I sat in the back with Bean's car seat beside me, watching streetlights slide past streets I hadn't walked down since I was 18. The corner shop was still there, the one my mum used to mention with a particular tightness in her voice. The bus shelter, when we finally reached it, looked exactly like every other bus shelter in that part of the city: scratched plastic, a torn timetable, a bench just slightly too cold to sit on comfortably, and somehow that ordinariness made the whole thing worse. This wasn't a dramatic place for something dramatic to happen. It was just a bus shelter. Frightened girls end up in unremarkable places all the time. The world doesn't dress the scene to match the crisis. We found Chloe at 4:10 in the morning, sitting on a bus shelter bench 2 streets from a house I hadn't set foot in for 6 years, wearing a jumper that clearly wasn't warm enough, staring at nothing, looking so young and so completely undone that something in my chest simply gave way. Priya went first, gentle, unhurried, crouching down to Chloe's eye level with the practiced calm of someone who had talked 100 frightened girls off 100 metaphorical ledges. I stood back, holding Bean, watching Chloe's face crumple the moment Priya said the word hospital, bracing for her to bolt. She didn't bolt. She just started to cry, silently, shoulders shaking, and said the only sentence I think I will ever remember word for the rest of my life. "I didn't leave because I don't want her. I left because I want her to have a mum who isn't me." We didn't take her back to the hospital straight away. Priya made the call, gently but firmly, that what Chloe needed first was 5 minutes that weren't a medical corridor, and so the 4 of us, me, Priya, Chloe, and one extremely unbothered infant, ended up sitting in Priya's car with the heater on, at 4:30 in the morning, while Chloe told us, in halting, exhausted pieces, exactly how she'd ended up alone on a bus shelter bench 2 streets from where she was born. Her mum, Denise, had thrown her out 3 months ago, when the pregnancy first showed. Not out of cruelty, exactly, Chloe was careful, almost protective, in how she explained it, but out of her own panic, her own history, her own inability to look at her 17-year-old daughter's situation without seeing, superimposed over it, her own mother's fury when she'd fallen pregnant with Chloe at 19. "She said some stuff she probably didn't mean," Chloe said, staring at her hands. "But you can't really take that back once it's out, can you?" She'd been sofa surfing since a mate's house, then a mate of a mate's, then, for the last 3 weeks, technically nowhere at all, technically a hostel that was technically full most nights. She'd gone into labor on a bus. She'd had, in her own words, literally nobody to call, and had given the hospital her mum's name for the file because it was the only address she had, not because she expected anyone to come. "The worst bit," she said, staring out the fogged-up window, "wasn't even the labor. Everyone tells you the labor's the scary bit, and it properly was, but the worst bit was after. Everyone in that room kept asking me who they should ring. Birth partner, they kept saying. Emergency contact. And I just kept saying I didn't have one, and every single time I said it, I watched their face do this little thing, not mean, just, like, sad, and a bit surprised, like they'd never actually met anyone with genuinely nobody before. By about the fourth time somebody asked, I'd started just saying my mom's not really in the picture, so I didn't have to watch that face happen again. "You've got somebody now," Priya said quietly, from the driver's seat. "I've got a social worker and a stranger who was made to hold my baby by accident," Chloe said, and there was no bitterness in it, just a kind of exhausted, disbelieving honesty. "Not exactly what I pictured." "Fair," I said. "Not exactly what I pictured for my Tuesday either, if it's any comfort." That got a small, watery laugh out of her, the first crack of humor in an otherwise devastating hour, and something in the car eased, just slightly, the way a held breath finally lets go. "I thought," she said, and her voice cracked properly now, "if I left before they made me sign anything, before I had to actually decide, then it wasn't really me deciding." Does that make sense? I know it doesn't make sense. I looked at her, 17, 7 hours postpartum, sitting in a stranger's car in a jumper that wasn't warm enough, trying to explain the specific, impossible arithmetic of loving something so much you're prepared to disappear rather than fail it, and I thought about my mum, at 17, in a flat 2 streets from here. And I thought about my Nana turning up the next morning with a bag of nappies and no judgment in her face at all. "It makes complete sense," I said. "It's the most sense anything's made all night, honestly." Chloe looked up at me properly for the first time. Is that her?" "Is that she's called Bean," I said, before I could stop myself, and then, feeling suddenly, absurdly shy, "That's not her real name." I didn't know her real name. I had to call her something. Something moved across Chloe's face, grief and hope, arriving at exactly the same moment, the way they so often do. "Can I hold her?" "Of course you can," I said. "She's yours." We went back. All 4 of us, in Priya's car, the sky beginning to do that pale, uncertain thing it does just before proper dawn, being fed, changed, and thoroughly done with the whole night, asleep in her mother's arms for the very first time since she'd been born 9 hours earlier. There was a great deal of process after that, forms, assessments, a conversation with Priya's colleagues about support packages and health visitor referrals, and something called a family group conference that sounded, Chloe muttered, like a school assembly but for adults who've messed up, which made even Priya laugh. Denise was rung, at Chloe's own halting request, at 6 in the morning, and I will not pretend that call went smoothly, or that 17 years of complicated family history unraveled itself into neat forgiveness over a single sunrise phone call in a hospital corridor. It didn't. Denise arrived at 8, tight-lipped, clearly frightened herself, and the first 20 minutes between her and Chloe were stiff and painful to witness. But I watched Denise's face when she finally looked properly at the baby, really looked, past her own guilt and fear and 3 months of silence, and I watched something in her go the way my Nana's must have gone, all those years ago, in a flat 2 streets from that bus shelter. She didn't say much. She just reached out one finger, the way people do with new babies, and let Bean's whole tiny hand close around it, and said, very quietly, "She's got your dad's chin, God help her," which was such an odd, specific, human thing to say that Chloe actually laughed through her tears, and I understood, watching it, that whatever came next for the 2 of them, it wasn't going to be nothing. I stepped out to give them space, but the door didn't close properly, and I'll admit I lingered close enough to hear more than I probably should have. I said things I shouldn't have said, I heard Denise say, her voice low and rough. "I've had 3 months to think about every single one of them, and I'm not going to stand here and pretend I didn't mean it in the moment, because you'd know I was lying." But I've had 3 months of lying awake wondering if you were safe, Chloe, and that's a worse feeling than anything I said to you, by a long way, and I don't know how to fix 3 months in one morning, but I'd like to try, if you'll let me." There was a long silence. I held my breath without meaning to. "I'm not moving back in just because there's a baby now," Chloe said finally, and there was something steadier in her voice than I'd heard all night, something that sounded, for the first time, less like a frightened girl and more like a young mother deciding, in real time, what she would and wouldn't accept. "I need to know you actually want us there. Not just, feel like you have to, because it's a baby, and babies are meant to fix things. They don't. I need you to want me there too." "I do," Denise said, and her voice cracked properly on the second word. "God, Chloe, I do. I've wanted that every single day since you left. I just didn't know how to say it without it sounding like I was trying to control you again, and I didn't want to make things worse, so I said nothing, and I know now that was its own kind of wrong. You could have just texted." "I know. Like, a normal text. Sorry, please come home. Not complicated." "I know, Chloe." A small, watery laugh. "I'm not always as sensible as I look, apparently." "Clearly," Chloe said, and I heard, through the gap in the door, the specific sound of a hospital blanket rustling as two people who had spent 3 months apart finally, carefully, closed the distance between them. Fiona found me in the corridor not long after, off shift now, still in her scrubs, eyes red-rimmed. "I am so sorry," she said, before I could say anything at all. "I've never done anything like that in my life. I've been a nurse for 2 years and I have never once left a patient. I don't even know how to explain it. Everything just went sideways at once, and I saw you, and you were the only person on that whole corridor with 2 free arms, and I just..." She stopped, visibly close to tears. "I'll understand if you want to make a complaint." "I'm not making a complaint," I said. "You were drowning, and the ward was 3 nurses down, and you made a call in about 4 seconds that turned out, in the end, all right. Not because of the system. In spite of it. That's not really on you." "It could have gone so badly," Fiona said. "It didn't, though," I said. That's the bit worth remembering. By 9 o'clock, I was sitting in a family waiting room I now knew far better than any reasonable person should, holding 2 cups of truly terrible hospital tea, watching my mother cradle her first grandchild in one corner while, in the next room over, a 17-year-old girl and her mother took the first tentative, wobbling steps towards something that might, eventually, with time and support and a great deal of grace, resemble a family too. Kate wheeled herself out to find me, Florence asleep on her chest, moving slowly and looking thoroughly wrecked in the specific, luminous way new mothers do. "So," she said, easing herself into the chair beside me. "You had quite the night." "I really did. Mum's told absolutely everyone in this waiting room. There's a woman by the vending machine who now knows more about your evening than I do." "Of course she has." Jess turned up around 10, having driven straight from her flat the second I'd texted her the words, "She's safe." We found her, armed with a bag of pastries from the good bakery and absolutely no chill whatsoever about the whole situation. "Right," she announced, dropping into the chair beside me without so much as a hello. "I need the full timeline, start to finish, no skipping bits for drama, and then I need to actually meet this baby everyone's been telling me about. Because I have driven 40 minutes on approximately no sleep and I refuse to leave without at least one photograph." "You've never even met her." "Alice, I have been personally invested in this baby since 12:15 this morning when you rang me in a panic about wind. I am practically her godmother at this point." "You cannot be a stranger's godmother." "Watch me," Jess said, and helped herself to one of the pastries she'd brought, which felt, on reflection, like exactly the right amount of chaos to end a night like that one. Kate looked at me for a long moment, the particular assessing look older sisters reserve for moments when they suspect something has actually, properly changed in you. You all right? I thought about it honestly, which is more than I'd managed for most of the last 12 hours. I don't know. I held a baby that wasn't mine for 8 hours and somehow ended up in the middle of two women's entire lives falling apart and back together in the same night. I've had maybe 45 minutes sleep. I'm holding tea I don't even want. I think I might actually be all right, though. Which feels like a strange thing to say. Sounds about right for a Bennett, Kate said. We do everything the difficult way. My dad found me not long after, wandering the corridor with 2 teas he'd clearly bought some time ago and forgotten he was carrying, judging by the temperature. He is not, as a rule, a man given to displays of emotion. I have seen him cry exactly twice in my life, once at his own father's funeral and once, inexplicably, during an advert for a supermarket at Christmas, but he stood there for a long moment looking at me holding Aisha, and Kate's door opened behind me with Florence just visible inside, and something in his face went soft in a way I wasn't quite prepared for. Your mother's told me the whole story, he said. 3 times. With embellishments. It's mostly accurate, though the bit about me karate chopping a security guard did not happen, for the record. I assumed as much. He looked down at Aisha, asleep, one small fist curled against her cheek. You know, when you were about 6, you brought home a hedgehog you found under next door's shed and insisted we were keeping it. Cried for 2 hours when your mother said no. I remember. Very unfairly, I might add. I'm just saying, he said, you've always been like this. Something small and in trouble, and you simply cannot walk past it. I used to think it'd get you into bother one day. He nodded at Aisha, at the general shape of the last several hours. Suppose I wasn't wrong. Just didn't picture it being quite this dramatic. Are you upset with me? Upset? He looked genuinely startled by the question. Alice, I have watched you sit up all night with a baby that wasn't yours because nobody else in that building would, and somewhere in the middle of it you apparently tracked down a frightened teenager using nothing but local knowledge and sheer bloody-mindedness. I'm not upset. I'm trying to work out how you turned out to have more sense in one night than I've managed in 56 years. He handed me one of the lukewarm teas, entirely undrinkable, and I took it anyway, because it was the gesture that mattered. Your Nana would have been proud of you tonight, is what I'm trying to say, badly, at 9:30 in the morning, having had no sleep myself. I hadn't expected that to undo me quite as thoroughly as it did, standing in a hospital corridor holding cold tea and someone else's daughter, but it did, entirely, and my dad, a man who does not do this sort of thing, put one arm around my shoulders and let me have my moment without saying another word about it, which was, in its own quiet way, exactly the right thing to do. Chloe found me before I left. Later that morning, Bean, properly named, I learned, as Aisha, after Chloe's late gran, asleep in a hospital cot beside her bed, Denise dozing in the chair, the two of them having reached, over several exhausted hours, a fragile, unglamorous, entirely real truce. I wanted to say thank you, Chloe said. Properly. Not just, the car, and everything. For not looking at me like I was a monster. For calling her Bean, even though it's a stupid name. It's an excellent name, I said. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Will you? She hesitated, twisting the edge of the blanket. This is probably weird. But will you come and see her sometime? Not, like, I'm not trying to make this your thing. I just. You were the only person all night who didn't look at me like I'd done something unforgivable. I looked at her, 17, exhausted, terrified, and somehow, in the space of one very long night, already fighting harder for her daughter than most people ever have to fight for anything, and I thought about my mum, and my Nana, and the bag of nappies, and the whole quiet, unbroken chain of women in difficult circumstances being caught, at the last possible moment, by someone who simply refused to let go. "I'd like that very much," I said. "Actually, I know a health visitor who owes me a favor after tonight. And my mum makes an unreasonable amount of extra dinner most Sundays. Just, if you two ever fancied a change of scene." Chloe's face did something complicated and hopeful. "You'd really do that?" "Chloe," I said. "I held your daughter for 8 hours because a nurse asked me to for 5 minutes and then had a genuine medical emergency. I think we're a bit past normal levels of involvement at this point." She laughed, a real one, small and surprised, the first I'd heard from her all night, and for a moment, in that overheated little room, with the sun properly up now outside the window, everything felt, against every possible expectation, like it might actually be okay. Being Aisha, though I'll admit the nickname has, embarrassingly, stuck, and even Denise uses it now, mostly by accident, is 6 months old, thoroughly opinionated, and possesses, per her mother, an absolutely evil sense of humor for someone with no teeth. She comes to my mum's for Sunday dinner most weeks, usually with Chloe, sometimes with Denise too, the three of them slowly, awkwardly, imperfectly rebuilding something that will never look like the family Chloe pictured at 17, sofa surfing and frightened, but which looks, now, remarkably, like an actual one, messy, occasionally tense, entirely real. Florence, my niece, 6 months old herself and equally opinionated, has already established what Kate calls a rivalry over whose turn it is with the good high chair, which I choose to interpret as an excellent foundation for a lifelong friendship. Fiona still works on that ward, though the trust, under some pressure from an internal review that I may or may not have contributed a strongly worded statement to, finally hired the extra staff that unit had been asking for since long before that particular Tuesday. She sends Chloe a card every year on Aisha's birthday. This year it had a badly drawn bean on the front. Chloe has it stuck to her fridge. "We had that birthday last month, actually, Aisha's, not Florence's, though the two are close enough together now that my mother has started planning what she calls, with great seriousness, a joint party situation for future years, so we're not doing this twice a month, David. Think of the sandwiches, in Denise's back garden, bunting strung between the washing line and a fence post, a cake with one wobbly candle that Aisha regarded with deep suspicion before deciding, after some negotiation, that it was in fact delicious." Jess came, obviously, having spent 14 years establishing herself as a permanent fixture at every Bennett occasion regardless of blood relation, and spent a good 20 minutes interrogating Chloe about the actual full story, start to finish. "I've been waiting 9 months for this," while Chloe, laughing, tried to keep up. Pam came too, off duty, in normal clothes, looking so different out of scrubs that it took Chloe a full minute to recognize her, and brought a present so extravagantly oversized that Denise had to help unload it from the car. 19 years on that ward, Pam said, settling into a garden chair with the specific contentment of a woman finally sitting down after a very long week, and I don't think I've ever been invited to one of these before. Usually you just send them off into the world and never hear another word. "Well," I said, "you're stuck with us now. Fair warning." "I can think of worse things to be stuck with," Pam said, watching Aisha attempt, with great determination, to eat a fistful of grass. Denise, for her part, has become, against every possible expectation any of us had that first gray morning, a genuinely excellent grandmother, the kind who keeps a spare set of everything at her flat and has strong, frequently voiced opinions about the correct brand of nappies. She and Chloe still argue, sometimes, the way mothers and daughters who have properly heard each other do, old wounds surfacing at odd moments over something as small as a bath time or a bedtime, but they argue now the way people argue when they intend to stay in the room afterwards, which is, I've come to understand, the whole difference. As for me, I still work at the same primary school, still occasionally call my head teacher Mum by accident, still have absolutely no formal qualifications whatsoever in childcare beyond one badly remembered first aid course. But I have, apparently, become the sort of person a health visitor rings when she's worried about a young mum who's gone quiet, the sort of person my own mother now introduces at parties as my daughter, the one who collects babies, which I have given up correcting, because at this point, honestly, fair enough. At the party, near the end, once the cake had been demolished and most of the adults were sitting in various states of contented exhaustion on Denise's mismatched garden furniture, Chloe came and sat beside me with 2 mugs of tea, handing me one without asking if I wanted it, the way you do with people you've stopped being formal with. "I've been thinking about something," she said, watching Aisha stagger determinedly toward the flower bed. "That night. If Fiona hadn't grabbed you specifically. If it had been somebody else in that corridor, somebody who just wanted an easy life, who handed her straight to the nursery and went home to bed. I think about that a lot, actually. What would have happened to her? To me?" "Don't," I said gently. "You can drive yourself round the bend thinking about all the versions of that night that didn't happen." "I know. I do it anyway, sometimes." She wrapped both hands around her mug. "I just wanted to say it, is all. That it mattered. That you being you, specifically, that night, mattered more than you probably let yourself think about." I didn't have a clever answer for that, which is rare enough for me that I remember the silence more clearly than almost anything else from that whole afternoon, just the 2 of us, watching a toddler wage a losing battle against a flower bed, tea going lukewarm in our hands, 9 months and one impossible night behind us, and something steady and unremarkable and entirely good stretching out ahead. Sometimes, on the good days, when Aisha falls asleep on my shoulder at Sunday dinner the way she did that very first night in a hospital corridor that smelled of antiseptic and vending machine coffee, I think about Fiona, for hours into an impossible shift, looking at a corridor full of strangers and deciding, in a single desperate second, that I was the one with 2 free arms and a face she could trust. She was right, as it turns out. She just had no idea, that night, exactly how right, or how far 5 minutes was actually going to stretch. Some promises, I've learned, aren't broken so much as they're simply much, much bigger than anyone standing in that corridor could have possibly known. Jess still brings that up, every so often, usually at the worst possible moment, a wedding toast, a work leaving due, once, memorably, my own birthday dinner, leaning over to whoever's nearest and saying, with great relish, "Did you know Alice once got handed a random baby in a hospital and just kept it for a whole night? Best story I've ever heard secondhand." And every time, I let her tell it, because she tells it well, and because it's true, mostly, in all the ways that matter, except for the word kept, which was never quite right. I didn't keep Aisha. I just refused to put her down until somebody who actually loved her was ready to pick her back up. There's a difference, in the end, between holding on and letting go too soon, and I think that's the whole lesson that Tuesday was trying, in its chaotic, exhausting, entirely unplanned way, to teach me. I got there in the end. So that's the story. That's what happened on the one night I went for a walk to escape my mother's pacing and came back, 8 hours later, as someone slightly different than I'd been before. People ask me sometimes what the lesson of it all was, usually at weddings, Usually after Jess has already told the short, dramatic version to whoever will listen, and I never quite know how to answer that in one sentence, because I don't think it was one lesson. I think it was several, arriving all at once, at the worst possible hour, the way the important ones usually do. It taught me that systems break, that hospitals, however hard the people inside them are working, are still just people, running on too little sleep and too few hands, and that sometimes the whole machinery of care comes down to one exhausted stranger deciding, in a single desperate second, to trust another exhausted stranger standing nearby. It taught me that the difference between a tragedy and a story with a happy ending is sometimes nothing more than somebody refusing to walk away. And it properly taught me, not just as a fact I'd always known about my mom and my nana, but as something I'd now lived myself, that family was never really about who you're born to. It's about who turns up. Who stays in the room. Who holds on, even when holding on was never technically their job. Fiona held on for 5 minutes and then couldn't. I held on for the rest of the night because, somewhere in the middle of it, I stopped being able to imagine doing anything else. Chloe held on for 17 years of a life that gave her very little reason to, and then, in the hardest moment of it, for one terrifying half hour, she let go, and the whole rest of that story was really just about everyone else deciding not to let her carry that alone. If there's one thing I'd want anyone to take from all this, it's simple enough to fit on the back of a hospital linen trolley. When someone hands you something fragile and says, just 5 minutes, don't be too quick to put it down the second the 5 minutes are up. You never know exactly how much you're being trusted with, or how far it's going to stretch, or who's going to walk back through those double doors changed because you didn't let go. That's the whole story. Thanks for sticking with it till the end, same as I did. Alice, signing off. Go and hug whoever's nearest.